let's take a break, do a little something fun for a Friday. It's 8:15, and I am going to continue our conversation about the great author and creator of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, known as Body Snatchers. And again, if you want to get that paperback, it's $260 on Amazon now, the original with the title Body Snatchers, the Body Snatchers. But we're going to talk about Jack Finney, and we're going to read a short story by Jack Finney coming right up. It's time for Fiction Friday. Karen, Smooth, thanks for being there on X. Let's get right over into it. To everybody in Rumble, thank you for being there. And we will break this off and turn it into another story on its own. Let's go with the control voice from Outer Room.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
Yeah, all right. The Outer Limits, and our opportunity to dive back into some of the biographical information of the legendary writer and creator of the Body Snatchers, taking the doppelganger idea and putting it on 11, as they might say in Spinal Tap, Jack Finney. His real name, Walter Braden Finney. Now, I've got some background for you. He was born in 1911 and died in 1995, the same year that the sequel to Time and Again, the book called From Time to Time, was released. And again, Time and Again, a very unique story that is a time travel story which is composed of postcards and letters and things that are discovered archaeological finds and things like that. Very interesting stuff. And as I mentioned, if you get an opportunity, they talk about the audio here at Fantastic Fiction for Time and Again, check out the audio for Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It is so good. But we'll show you a few other items from him. And I want to tell you a little bit about his early career as a mystery writer. We'll tell you about that in a minute. Ellery, I think it was Ellery Queen magazine was the first one in the 1940s to publish one of his short stories. But you can see he's got a lot of novels: Five Against the House, The Body Snatchers, A House of Numbers. And these were a combination of mystery. He did a lot of time travel stories and science fiction and horror. He has a couple of sort of straight up horror stories. And you can see these yellow ones are science fiction. The Night People is more of a horror story. And then we've got Five Against the House is an adventure mystery sort of noir story. It's about gambling, as you can see there. So very, very cool stuff. $60 for that one, published in 1955. But I want to tell you a little bit about Jack Finney. So just to give you some information, he was born October 2nd, 1911, and died on November 14th, 1995. And he was born in Milwaukee, and he died in California, Green Bay, California. He went to Knox College, and he graduated before World War II, 1934. And he wrote a lot of noir stories first. So let me give you some background information here. I've got something written up. I haven't published it yet. Like I said, I haven't published the other one about Dostoevsky yet either. I'll put those in my Substack for you. Some of these bios about some of these amazing writers. Really interesting. Now, he wrote nonfiction stuff in the 40s. He wrote an article for Cosmopolitan that was essentially 1943 about World War II and the struggle in the war. And that was called Someone Who Knows Told Me. And then he wrote a story called The Widow's Walk. And The Widow's Walk won a contest. It won a contest for Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine in 1946. And it wasn't until 9 years later that his first novel, Five Against the House, was published in originally 1954 as a hardcover. You're seeing the paperback that I showed you there was 1955. Now, he published some short stories in the interim. He published one called Such Interesting Neighbors in 1951. And that was the basis for something called science fiction theater. And they were doing radio and television at the time. And it co-starred Don DeFore and Warren Stevens. And that story led to him being picked up by others. And that story itself, Time is Just a Place, was later redone for Steven Spielberg's anthology series, Amazing Stories. And you know who starred in that story? By Jack Finney, the author of The Body Snatchers. It was called Time is Just a Place. Adam Ant was in that in 1987. Pretty cool. Now, let me tell you a couple other little quick items about Jack Finney and some of his background. I'm going to give this to you here. I think you might find this interesting. Now, as far as movies are concerned, if you go to his IMDb, you'll see that he was known as Jack by nickname. He didn't adopt it. He was known as Jack by nickname. And there have been the 1950s one. Then there was the 1970s Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Then there was Body Snatchers in 1993, and Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig starred in the 2007 The Invasion, which was a play on the Invasion of the Body Snatchers as well. I haven't seen that one, but it's all doppelganger type stuff. And again, if you read the story, it is wonderful. I'm going to read to you another story by Jack Finney that I think you're going to dig. So here it is. This is from a book, and I'll put Jack Finney's bio up on the screen again for y'all in my Rush Tour t-shirt. So there it is. I'll make myself small. I'll go like that. How's that? Okay. So this is from Scholastic books that you could have ordered as a kid, the Scholastic Book Club thing. And by the way, Scholastic was the company that accepted J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. She got declined by tons of other publishing companies. But Scholastic brought her in, and they made Scholastic massive amounts of money. Now Scholastic is experiencing some hard times because fewer kids are buying the books from Scholastic. But I actually knew a woman whose daughter worked for Scholastic, and she was becoming like a multimillionaire because it was just that time that J.K. Rowling and Scholastic Books were publishing the Harry Potter series. This is a story called The Love Letter. Now, let me see when this was published. I don't know if they've got the publishing credits in here. Um, 1959. Okay. So this is The Love Letter from a book called 11 Great Horror Stories from Scholastic Books. And this Scholastic book, if you want to find it, was originally published in 1969. This is the 7th printing of it, 1973. The Love Letter by Jack Finney. I've heard of secret drawers in old desks, of course. Who hasn't? But the day I bought my desk, I wasn't thinking of secret drawers. And I know very well I didn't have any least premonition or feel of mystery about it at all. I spotted it in the window of a secondhand store near my apartment when I went in to look it over, and the proprietor told me where he had got it. It came from one of the last of the big old mid-Victorian houses in Brooklyn. They were tearing it down over at Brock Place, a few blocks away, and he'd bought the desk along with some other furniture, dishes, glassware, light fixtures, and so on. But it didn't stir my imagination particularly. I never wondered or cared who might have used it long ago. I bought it and lugged it home because it was cheap and because it was small, a legless little wall desk that I fastened to my living room wall with heavy screws directly into the studding. I'm 24 years old, tall and thin, and I live in Brooklyn to save money and work in Manhattan to make it. When you're 24 and a bachelor, you usually figure you'll be married before much longer. And since they tell me that takes money, I'm reasonably ambitious and bring work home from the office every once in a while. And maybe every couple weeks or so, I write a letter to my folks in Florida. So I'd be needing a desk. There's no table in my phone booth kitchenette, and I'd be trying to work at a wobbly little end table I couldn't get my knees under. So I bought the desk one Saturday afternoon and spent an hour or so fastening it to the wall. It was after 6 when I finished. I had a date that night, and so I had time to stand and admire it for only a minute or so. It was made of heavy wood with a slant top like a kid's school desk, and with the same sort of space underneath to put things into. But the back of it rose a good 2 feet above the desktop and was full of pigeonholes like an old-style roll-top desk. Underneath the pigeonholes was a row of 3 brass-knobbed little drawers. It was all pretty ornate, the drawer ends carved, some fancy scroll work extending up over the back and out from the sides to help brace it against the wall. I dragged a chair up, sat down at the desk to try it for height, then got showered, shaved, and dressed, and went over to Manhattan to pick up my date. I'm trying to be honest about what happened, and I'm convinced that includes the way I felt when I got home around 2 or 2:30 that morning. I'm certain that what happened wouldn't have happened at all if I'd felt any other way. I'd had a good enough time that evening. We'd gone to an early movie that wasn't too bad, then had dinner, a drink or so, and some dancing afterward. And the girl, Roberta Haig, is pretty nice, bright, pleasant, good-looking. But walking home from the subway, the Brooklyn streets quiet and deserted, it occurred to me that while I'd probably see her again, I didn't really care whether I did or not. And I wondered, as I often had lately, whether there was something wrong with me, whether I'd ever meet a girl I desperately wanted to be with. The only way a man can get married, it seems to me. So when I stepped into my apartment, I knew I wasn't going to feel like sleep for a while. I was restless, half irritated for no good reason, and I took off my coat and yanked down my tie, wondering whether I wanted a drink or some coffee. Then, I'd half forgotten about it, I saw the desk I'd bought that afternoon, and I walked over and sat down at it, thoroughly examining it for the first time. I lifted the top and stared down into the empty space underneath it. Lowering the top, I reached into one of the pigeonholes, and my hand and shirt cuff came out streaked with old dust. The holes were a good foot deep. I pulled open one of the little brass knob drawers, and there was a shred of paper in one of its corners. Nothing else. I pulled the drawer all the way out and studied its construction, turning it in my hands. It was a solidly made, beautifully mortised little thing. Then I pushed my hand into the drawer, the opening itself. It went in to about the middle of my hand before my fingertips touched the back, and there was nothing in there. For a few moments, I just sat at the desk, thinking vaguely that I could write a letter to my folks. And then it suddenly occurred to me that the little drawer in my hand was only half a foot long, while the pigeonholes just above the drawer extended a good foot back. Shoving my hand into the opening again, exploring with my fingertips, I found a tiny grooved indentation and pulled out the secret drawer, which lay in back of the first. For an instant, I was excited at the glimpse of papers inside it. Then I felt a stab of disappointment as I saw what they were. There was a little sheaf of folded writing paper, plain white, but yellowed with age at the edges, and the sheets were all blank. There were 3 or 4 blank envelopes to match, and underneath them all, a small, round glass bottle of ink. And because it had been upside down, the cork remaining moist and tight in the bottle mouth, a good third of the ink had remained unevaporated still. Beside the bottle lay a plain, black wooden pen holder, the pen point reddish black, with old ink. There was nothing else in the drawer. And then, putting the things back into the drawer, I felt the slight extra thickness of one blank envelope, saw that it was sealed, and I ripped it open to find the letter inside. The folded paper opened stiffly, the crease permanent with age. And even before I saw the date, I knew this letter was old. The handwriting was obviously feminine and beautifully clear. It's called Spencerian, isn't it? The letters perfectly formed and very ornate, the capitals especially being a whirl of dainty curlicues. The ink was rust black. The date at the top of the page was May 14th, 1882. And reading it, I saw that it was a love letter. It began, "Dearest, Papa, Mama, Willie, and Cook are long retired and to sleep. Now, the night far advanced, the house silent, I alone remain awake, at last free to speak to you as I choose. Yes, I am willing to say it, heart of mine, I crave your bold glance. I long for the tender warmth of your look. I welcome your ardency and prize it. For what else should these be taken but sweet tribute to me?" I smiled a little. It was hard to believe that people had once expressed themselves so elaborately with phrasings of this kind, but they had. The letter continued, and I wondered why it had never been sent. "Dear one, do you not ever change your way? Dear one, do not ever change your ways. Never address me other than with what consideration my utterances should deserve. If I be foolish and whimsical, deride me sweetly if you will. But if I speak with seriousness, respond always with what care you deem my thoughts worthy. For, my beloved, I am sick to death of the indulgent smile and tolerant glance with which a woman's fancies are met, as I am repelled by the false gentleness and nicety of manners which too often ill conceal the wantonness they attempt to mask. I speak of the man I am to marry, if you could but save me from that. Oh, but you cannot. You are everything I prize, warmly, honestly, and ardent. You are respectful in heart as well as in manner, true and loving. You are as I wish to be, for you exist only in my mind. But, figment though you are, and though I shall never see your like, you are more dear to me than he to whom I am betrothed. I think of you constantly. I dream of you. I speak with you in my mind and heart. Would you exist outside them? Sweetheart, good night. Dream of me, too. With all my love, I am your Helen. Oh. At the bottom of the page, as I'm sure she had been taught in school, was written, Miss Helen Elizabeth Worley, Brooklyn, New York. And as I stared down at it now, I was no longer smiling at this cry from the heart in the middle of a long ago night. And the night is a strange time when one is alone, the rest of the world asleep. If I'd found that letter in the daytime, I'd have smiled and shown it to a few friends and then forgotten it. But alone there, with a window partly open, a cool late-night freshness stirring the quiet air, it was impossible to think of the girl who had written this letter as a very old lady, or maybe long since dead. As I read her words, she seemed real and alive to me, sitting, or so I pictured her, pen in hand, at this desk, in a long, white, old-fashioned dress, her young hair piled on top of her head, in the dead of a night like this. Here in Brooklyn, almost in sight of where I now sat, she could have been. And my heart went out to her as I stared down at her secret thoughts, her hopeless appeal against the world and the time in which she lived. I am trying to explain why I answered that letter. There, in the silence of a timeless spring night, it seemed natural enough to uncork that old bottle, pick up the pen beside it, and then, spreading a sheet of yellowing old notepaper on the desktop, to begin to write. I felt that I was communicating with a still living young woman when I wrote, "Helen, I have just read the letter in the secret drawer of your desk, and I wish I knew how I could possibly help you. I can't tell you what you might think of me if there were a way I could reach you. But you are someone I am certain I would like to know. I hope you are beautiful, and you needn't be. You're a girl I could like, and maybe ardently. And if I did, I promise you, I'd be true and loving. Do the best you can, Helen Elizabeth Worley, in the time and place you are. I can't reach you or help you, but I'll think of you, and maybe I'll dream of you too. Yours, Jake Belknap." I was grinning a little sheepishly as I signed my name, knowing I'd read through what I'd written and that I might crumple the old sheet and throw it away. But I was glad I'd written it, and I didn't throw it away. Still caught in the feeling of the warm, silent night, it suddenly seemed to me that throwing my letter away would turn the writing into a meaningless and foolish thing, though maybe what I did seems more foolish still now. I folded the paper, put it into one of the envelopes, and sealed it. Then I dipped the pen into the old ink and wrote, "Miss Helen Worley," on the face of the envelope. I suppose this can't be explained. You'd have to have been where I was and felt as I did to really understand it, but I wanted to mail that letter. I simply quit examining my feelings and quit trying to be rational about it. I was suddenly determined to complete what I'd begun, just as far as I was able to take it. My parents sold their old home in New Jersey when my father retired 2 years ago, and now, well, they live in Florida and they enjoy it. And when my mother cleared out the old house I grew up in, well, she packed up and mailed me a huge package of useless things I was glad to have. There were class photographs dating from grammar school through college, old books I'd read as a kid, Boy Scouts pins, a massive junk, really, of all sorts, including a stamp collection I'd had in grade school. Now I found those things on my hall closet shelf in the box they'd come in, and I found my old stamp collection. It's funny how things can stick in your mind over the years. Standing at the open closet door, I turned the pages of that beat-up old album directly to the stamps I remembered buying from another kid with 75 cents I'd earned cutting grass. There they lay, lightly fastened to the page with a little gummed paper hinge. A pair of 2 mint-condition 2-cent United States stamps issued in 1859. And standing there in the hallway, looking down at them, I once again got something of the thrill I'd had as a kid when I had acquired them. It's a handsome stamp, square in shape, with an ornate border and a tiny engraving in the center, a rider on a galloping post horse. And for all I knew, they might have been worth a fair amount of money, especially an unseparated pair of 2 of those stamps. But back at the desk, I pulled one of them loose, tearing carefully through the perforation, licking the back and fastening it to the faintly yellowing old envelope. I'd thought no further than that, and by now I suppose I was in almost a kind of trance. I shoved the old ink bottle and pen into a hip pocket, picked up my letter, and walked out of my apartment. Brock Place, 3 blocks away, was deserted when I reached it. The parked cars motionless at the curbs, the high, late moonlight softening the lines of the big concrete block supermarket at the corner. Then, as I walked on, my letter in my hand, there stood the old house, just past a little shoe repair shop. I stood far back from the broken cast iron fence in the center of its wide, weed-grown lot, black etched in the moonlight, and I stopped on the walk and stood, staring up at it. The high-windowed old roof was gone, the interior nearly gutted, the yard strewn with splintered boards and great chunks of torn plaster. The windows and doors were all removed, the openings hollow in the clear wash of light. But the high old walls, they were still there. They still stood tall and dignified in their old-fashioned strength and outmoded charm. I walked through the opening where a gate had once hung, up the cracked and weed-grown brick pavement toward the wide old porch, and there, on one of the ornated and fluted posts, I saw the house number deeply and elaborately carved into the old wood. At the wide flat porch rail leading down to the walk, I brought out my ink and pen and copied the number carefully onto my envelope. 972, I printed under the name of the girl who had once lived here. Brook Place, Brooklyn, New York. Then I turned toward the street again, my envelope in my hand. There was a mailbox at the next corner, and I stopped beside it. But to drop this letter into that box, knowing in advance that it could go only to the dead letter office, would, again, I couldn't help the feeling. It would turn the writing into an empty, meaningless act. And after a moment, I walked on past the mailbox. I crossed the street and turned right, suddenly knowing exactly where I was going. I walked 4 blocks through the night, passing a hack stand with a single cab, its driver asleep with his arms and head cradled on the wheel, passing a night watchman sitting on a standpipe, projecting from the old wall. He was smoking a pipe, and he nodded as I passed, and I nodded in response. I turned left at the next corner, walked half a block more, then turned up onto the worn stone steps of the Worcester Postal Substation. It must easily be one of the oldest postal substations in the borough. It was built, I suppose, not much later than the decade following the Civil War. And I can't imagine that the inside had changed much at all. The floor is marble, a ceiling, a high ceiling, the woodwork dark and carved. The outer lobby is open at all times, as are post office lobbies everywhere. And as I pushed through the old swinging doors, I saw that it was deserted. Somewhere behind the opaque blind windows, a light burned dimly far in the rear of the post office, and I had an impression of subdued activity back there. But the lobby itself was dim and silent, and as I walked across the worn stone of its floor, I knew I was seeing all around me precisely what Brooklynites had seen for no telling how many generations long gone. The post office has always seemed an institution of vague mystery to me, an ancient and worn but still functioning mechanism that's not operated, but only tended by each succeeding generation of men to come along. It's a place where occasionally plainly addressed letters with clearly written return addresses go astray and are lost to end up no one knows where, and for reasons impossible to discover, as the postal employee from whom you inquire will tell you. No one knows. And this vague air of mystery for me is made up of stories. Perhaps you've read some too from time to time. The odd little stories in your newspaper, a letter bearing a postmark of 1906 written half a century ago, delivered today, simply because, well, inexplicably, it arrived at some post office along with the other mail with no explanation from anyone now alive. Or sometimes it's a postcard of greeting from the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, perhaps. And once, tragically, as I remember reading, it was an acceptance of a proposal of marriage offered in 1901 and received today, a lifetime too late, by the man who made it and who married someone else and is now a grandfather. I pushed the worn brass plate open, dropped my letter into the silent blackness of the slot, and it disappeared forever, with no sound. Then I turned and left to walk home, with a feeling of fulfillment, of having done at least everything I possibly could in response to the silent cry for help I'd found in the secrecy of the old desk. Next morning, I felt the way almost anyone might, standing at the bathroom mirror shaving, remembering what I'd done the night before. I grinned, feeling foolish, but at the same time, secretly pleased with myself. I was glad I'd written and solemnly mailed that letter, and now I realized why I'd put no return address on the envelope. I didn't want it to come forlornly back to me with "no such person," or whatever the phrase is, stamped on the envelope. There'd once been such a girl, and last night she still existed for me. And I didn't want to see my letter to her rubber-stamped, scribbled on, and unopened. I didn't want to see my letter to her to prove there no longer was that girl. I was terrifically busy all the next week. I work for a wholesale grocery concern, and we got a big new client, a chain of supermarkets, and that meant extra work for everyone. More often than not, I had lunch at my desk in the office and worked several evenings besides. I had dates the 2 evenings I was free. On Friday afternoon, I was at the main public library in Manhattan at 5th Avenue and 42nd copying statistics from half a dozen trade publications for a memorandum I'd been assigned to write over the weekend on this new account. Later in the afternoon, the man sitting beside me at the big reading room table closed his book, stowed away his glasses, picked up his hat from the table, and left. I sat back in my chair, glancing at my watch. Then I looked over at the book he'd left on the table. It was a big, one-volume pictorial history of New York put out by Columbia University, and I dragged it over and began leafing through it. I skimmed over the first sections on colonial and pre-colonial New York. Well, I went through those pretty quickly. But when the old sketches and drawings began giving way to actual photographs, I turned the pages more slowly. I leafed past the first photos, taken around the mid-century, and then past those of the Civil War period. But when I reached the first photograph of the 1870s, it was a view of Fifth Avenue in 1871 that I saw, and I began reading the captions under each photo. I knew it would be too much to hope to find a photograph of Brock Place in Helen Worley's time especially, and of course, I didn't. But I knew there'd surely be photographs taken in Brooklyn during the 1880s, and a few pages farther, I found what I'd hoped I might. In clear, sharp detail and beautifully reproduced lay a big half-page photograph of a street less than a quarter mile from Brock Place, and staring down at it there in the library, I knew that Helen Worley must often have walked along that very sidewalk. Varney Street, 1881, the caption said. A typical Brooklyn residential street of the period. Varney Street today, I walk 2 blocks of it every night coming home from work. Well, Varney Street today is a wasteland. I pass 4 cinder-packed used car lots, a shabby concrete garage, the dead earth in front of it littered with rusting car parts and old tires, and a half dozen or so nearly paintless boarding houses, one with a soiled card in its window reading massage. It's a nondescript and joyless street, and it's impossible to believe that there has ever been a tree along its entire length. But there has been. There, in sharp black and white, in the book on the table before me, lay Varney Street, 1881, and from the wide grass-covered parkways between the cut stone curb and sidewalks, the thick, old, long-gone trees rose high on both sides to meet, intertwine, and roof the wide street with beautiful green. The photograph had been taken, apparently, from the street. It had been possible to do that then. In a day of occasional slow-trotting horses and buggies, and the camera was aimed at an angle to one side, toward the sidewalk and the big houses beyond it, looking down the walk for several hundred feet. The old walk, there in the foreground, under the great trees, appeared to be at least 6 feet wide, spacious enough easily for a family to walk down 4 or 5 abreast, as families did in those times, walk together down the sidewalk under the trees. And beyond the walk, widely separated and set back across the fine old lawns, rose the great houses, the 10, 12, and 14-room family houses, 2 or more stories high, with attics above them for children to play in and discover the relics of childhoods before them. Their windows were tall, and they were framed on the outside with ornamented wood. In the solid construction of every one of those lost houses in that ancient photograph, there had been left over the time, skill, money, and inclination to decorate their eaves with scroll work, to finish a job with craftsmanship and pride. In time, too, to build huge, wide porches on which families sat on summer evenings with palm leaf fans. Far down that lonely tree-sheltered street, out of focus and indistinct, walked the retreating figure of a long-skirted, puff-sleeved woman, her summer parasol open at her back. Of the thousands of long-dead girls it might have been, I knew this could not be Helen Worley. Yet it wasn't completely impossible, I told myself. This was a street, precisely as I saw it now, down which she must have walked. And I let myself think that, yes, this was she. Perhaps, maybe I live in what is for me the wrong time, and I was filled with the most desperate yearning to be there on that peaceful street, to walk off past the edges of the scene into the printed page before me, into the old and beautiful Brooklyn of long ago, and to draw near and overtake that bobbing parasol in the distance, and then turn and look into the face of the girl who held it. I worked that evening at home, sitting at my desk with a can of beer on the floor beside me. But once more, now Helen Elizabeth Worley was in my mind. I worked steadily all evening, and it was around 12:30 when I finished 11 handwritten pages, which I would get typed at the office on Monday. Then I opened the little center desk drawer into which I'd put a supply of rubber bands and paper clips, took out a clip and fastened the pages together, and sat back in my chair, taking a swallow of beer. The little center desk drawer stood half open as I had left it, and then as my eye fell on it, I realized suddenly that of course it, too, must have another secret drawer hiding behind it. I hadn't thought of that. I simply hadn't thought. It hadn't occurred to me the week before. In my interest and excitement over the letter I had found behind the first drawer of the row, and I'd been too busy all week to think of it since, but now I set down my beer. I pulled the center drawer all the way out, reached behind it, and found the little groove in the smooth wood I touched. Then I brought out the second secret little drawer. I'll tell you what I think, what I'm certain of, though I don't claim to be speaking scientifically. I don't think science has a thing to do with it. The night is a strange time. Things are different at night, as every human being knows somewhere deep inside him. And I think this: Brooklyn has changed over 7 decades. It is no longer the same place at all, but here and there still are little islands, isolated remnants of the way things once were. And the Worcester Postal Substation is one of them. It has changed really not at all. And I think that at night, late at night, the world asleep, when the sounds of things as they are now are nearly silent, and the sight of things as they are now is vague in the darkness, the boundary between now and then wavers. At certain moments and places, it fades. I think that there in the dimness of the old Worcester post office, in the dead of night, lifting my letter to Helen Worley toward the old brass door of the letter drop, I think that I stood on one side of that slot in the year 1959, and that I dropped my letter, properly stamped, written, and addressed in the ink and on the very paper of Helen Worley's youth, into the Brooklyn of 18 1982 on the other side of that worn old slot. I believe that. I'm not even interested in proving it, but I believe it. Because now, from that second secret little drawer, I brought out the paper I found in it, opened it, and in rusting black ink on yellowing old paper, I read, "Please, oh please, who are you? Where can I reach you? Your letter arrived today in the second morning post, and I have wandered the house and garden ever since in an agony of excitement. I cannot conceive how you saw my letter in its secret place, but since you did, perhaps you will see this one too. Oh, tell me your letter is no hoax or cruel joke. Willie, if it is you, if you have discovered my letter and think to deceive your sister with a prank, I pray you to tell me. But if it is not, if I now address someone who has truly responded to my most secret hopes, do not longer keep me ignorant of who and where you are, for I too, and I confess it willingly, I too long to see you. And I too feel and am almost certain of it, that if I could know you, I would love you. It is impossible for me to think otherwise. I must hear from you again. I shall not rest until I do. I remain most sincerely, Helen Elizabeth Worley." After a long time, I opened the first little drawer of the old box and took out the pen and ink I'd found there and a sheet of the notepaper. For minutes then, the pen in my hand, I sat there in the night, staring down at the empty paper on the desktop, and finally, then, I dipped the pen into the old ink and wrote, "Helen, my dear, I don't know how to say this, so it will seem Helen, my dear, I don't know how to say this, so it will seem even comprehensible to you. But I do exist here in Brooklyn, less than 3 blocks from where you now read this, in the year 1959. We are separated not by space, but by the years which lie between us. Now I own the desk which you once had, and at which you wrote the note I found in it. Helen, all I can tell you is that I answered that note, mailed it late at night at the old Worcester station, and that somehow it reached you, as I hope this will too. This is no hoax. Can you imagine anyone playing a joke that cruel? I live in a Brooklyn within sight of your house that you cannot imagine. It is a city whose streets are now crowded with wheeled vehicles propelled by engines. It is a city extending far beyond the limits you know, with a population of millions, so crowded there is hardly room any longer for trees. From my window, as I write, I can see across Brooklyn Bridge, which is hardly changed from the way you, too, can see it now. Manhattan Island, and rising from it are the lighted silhouettes of stone and steel buildings more than 1,000 feet high. You must believe me. I live. I exist. I live 77 years after you read this, and with the feeling that I have fallen in love with you. I sat for some moments staring at the wall, trying to figure out how to explain something I was certain was true. Then I wrote, Helen, there are 3 secret drawers in our desk. Into the first you put only the letter I found. You cannot now add something to that drawer and hope that it will reach me, for I have already opened that drawer and found only the letter you put there. Nothing else can now come down through the years to me in that drawer, for you cannot now alter what you have already done. In the second drawer, in 1882, you put the note which lies before me, which I found when I opened that drawer a few minutes ago. You put nothing else into it, and now that, too, cannot be changed. But I haven't opened the third drawer, Helen. Not yet. It is the last way you can still reach me, and the last time. I will mail this as I did before. Then wait. In a week, I will open the last drawer. Signed, Jake Belknap. It was a long week. I worked. I kept busy daytimes, but at night, I thought of hardly anything but the third secret drawer in my desk. I was terribly tempted to open it earlier, telling myself that whatever might lie in it had been there decades before and must be there now. But I wasn't sure, and I waited. Then, late at night, a week to the hour after I'd mailed my second letter at the old Worcester post office, I pulled out the third drawer, reached in, and brought out the last little secret drawer which lay behind it. My hand was actually shaking, and for a moment I couldn't bear to look directly. But something lay in the drawer. I turned my head away. Then, finally, I looked. I had expected a long letter, very long, of many pages, her last communication with me, and full of everything she wanted to say. But there was no letter at all. It was a photograph, about 3 inches square. A faded sepia in color, mounted on heavy, stiff cardboard, and with the photographer's name in tiny gold script down in the corner, Brunner and Holland, Parisian Photography, Brooklyn, New York. The photograph showed the head and shoulders of a girl in a high-necked dark dress with a cameo brooch at the collar. Her dark hair was swept tightly back, covering the ears, in a style which no longer suits our ideas of beauty. But the stark severity of that dress and hairstyle couldn't spoil the beauty of the face that smiled out at me from that old photograph. It wasn't beautiful in any classical sense, I suppose. The brows were unplucked and somewhat heavier than we are used to. But it is the soft, warm smile of her lips and her eyes, large and serene, as she looks out at me over the years, that make Helen Elizabeth Worley a beautiful woman. Across the bottom of her photograph, she had written, "I will never forget." And as I sat there at the old desk, staring at what she had written, I understood that, of course, that was all there was to say. What else? On this, the last time, as she knew that she'd ever be able to reach me. It wasn't the last time, though. There was one final way for Helen Worley to communicate with me over the years, and it took me a long time. It must have taken her to realize it. Only a week ago, on my fourth day of searching, I finally found it. It was late in the evening, and the sun was almost gone, when I found the old headstone among all the others stretching off in rows under the quiet trees. And then I read the inscription etched in the weathered old stone. Helen Elizabeth Worley, 1861 to 1934. Under this were the words, I never forgot, and neither will I. That is The Love Letter by Jack Finney. Jack Finney, born 1934. Was it? No. Was it 1934? No, he had his first story. Well, let me just double check again. 1911. That's right. He had his first story published in 1934, I think. Yeah. Let me see. Oh, no, that's right. He graduated Knox College in 1934. So, first story published in 1943, nonfiction, and then Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine was the contest winner of the Widow's Walk in 1946. Now, I'm going to go back to fantastic fiction, which must be getting invaded by some sort of writers that keeps putting up ads for whatever it is, Norton antivirus or something like that. That happens sometimes at fantastic fiction. It's kind of a frustrating thing for them. I don't know why that happens, but there's Jack Finney again, 1911, 1995. So 84 years old. But just to mention, time and again, if you've read Time and Again, you know that's, oh, there we go. There's the McAfee thing again. I'll take it down. That's the start of it. That's that story that we just read. That's the premise of Time and Again. Right there. And curiously enough, Richard Matheson's Time After Time with Christopher Reeve, he gets a box. It's like a cedar chest, like an old sea chest. He sees a picture of a woman from another century that played by Jane Seymour in the movie. That was based on a short story by Richard Matheson. And I don't know, I'll have to find out who wrote which first. But Time and Again here now I've been able to, re-queue the website there for you. That one, that is the start. That's the start of Time and Again. And you can see there, it says the classic illustrated novel, because in it they have a bunch of like old photographs from the 1800s of New York that you can see. So it lets you become like him seeing the photo. And I don't know, maybe everybody has experienced this sort of thing before. But I want to ask you, and sort of leave this before I ask you what you thought of the story. I want to ask you if you've ever experienced a situation. I'm going to call up something so I have a little darker screen on me here. I'm going to go back to my screen. If you've ever experienced a situation where you wish you had spoken to someone and you didn't do it. For example, I went to college in Boston University, rode the subway all the time, right? And I remember distinctly being in the auditorium stop. Let me see, was it auditorium? Yeah, it was the auditorium T stop. Oh, no, it was the Mass Ave T stop, Massachusetts Avenue T stop. And I was waiting for the right train, the right subway. And there was a woman who was in a crowd, and I just caught sight of her going aboard the train. Absolutely beautiful. And she caught sight of me. And I could tell that she thought that I was going to be boarding the train, but I didn't. And she got aboard the train inside the subway car. And she looked out at me. And I looked at her. And it was as the doors closed and the train went away, she kept eye contact with me. And you could tell that we both had wanted to talk to each other, and I didn't get aboard the train. That was really, really weird. And there was another time where there was an inn in Milford, not too far away from here, where a young woman, dark-haired woman, had worked, and I had been at dinner with my family. My uncle Dan Butcheroni, the prize fighter, had come up. He was there with my aunt, my mother's sister. We had a big family dinner at this place, and this woman had been one of the waitresses there. And I always wanted to go back and see this woman again. There was just something about the way that we looked at each other, communicated with each other during that dinner. And I wanted to figure out a way that I could go back and talk to her. And I ended up never eating dinner there again. And about 15 years later, I was out in front of a local bar not too far away. The place had closed. And there was a group of people there. And there was a young woman, now older, who looked at me. She had a similar sort of haircut, but I didn't make the connection then. And she said, "Do I know you?" And I only realized later, I was like, I don't know. I dropped the opportunity. I thought she might be with somebody else. I didn't want to be infringing. I realized it was that girl. It was her. And I didn't realize it until I got home. And I was like, oh, that was that girl. If I'd only said, "Oh, did you work in such and such a place? I always remembered you," and start talking or whatever, Yeah, I still like that place, Crazy stuff. Stuff is, it's life is wacky, It's a weird situation. I wonder if anybody's ever, I want to check out the chat before we close up shop tonight, see if anybody's ever been in that sort of a situation. And the light's going to make me look kind of weird orange, I'm sure. But I want to go over there, check out things, and see. I'll make myself small. Angela says, I never forget a face, especially someone I can't stand. Nostradamus says, ships passing in the night. Yeah, it happens so many times for people. Taylor Saunders, yes, like the time traveler's wife. And that's a really cool story, that time traveler's wife. Yeah, very, very cool concept to that. Yes, Taylor. Boy, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a good novel. That was really popular when it came out. Very good stuff. Then again, you have a lot of different time travel type stories like that. In fact, a whole genre grew up out of the popularity of Time After Time by Richard Matheson, Time After Time. Because of that, there was a whole series of books that were very popular for a long time of time travel romance. And they would actually have an hourglass and they would say time travel romance on the cover. And we sold a ton of those because ladies love those stories. They just thought they were great. I love stories like that too. And, it is strange too, because we're not only separated many times by time, but also distance. And, you don't want to just, blur away distance and think that anything can happen anywhere. But I'll give you an example. Many, many years ago, it was one of the craziest scenes. There was a young woman who worked in the bank where I went. And I thought she was really nice, and I wanted to ask her out. And at that time, the banks were much busier. It was a local bank, not too far from where I'd met this other woman or seen this other woman in Milford. And I wanted to ask this girl out, but she was working, and that's like not appropriate. Like, she's cornered. Don't do that. That's not cool. Like, if I saw her outside of work or something like that, like, hey, would you like to get together sometime? But even then, if I went back to the bank, it might be kind of awkward, kind of weird if she didn't want to. And I've always been sort of branded by that first time I asked a girl to dance and she said no. And that was, a super disappointment for me. So I was in 6th grade and the girl said no. It was terrible. So I was like, well, how do I ask this girl out? What do I do? So one day I went into the bank on a Saturday and I was going to ask her out. I was like, nah, this isn't appropriate. I can't do it. So I walked away. And as I walked out towards the doors, there was a bunch of desks. And my buddy Pete's mom worked at the bank. And she picked up the phone. She answered the phone. She goes, Gardner, it's for you. I was like, what? She goes, yeah, there's a phone call for you. I was like, oh, man, something happened to my mom or my dad? What's going on? What is this? Like, how do they know I was at the bank? How do they even know? Like, what this is? So I picked it up, and it was one of the ladies who worked behind the counter with that girl. She was on one of the company phones. She goes, Gardner, it's Nancy. She starts waving to me. I'm like, what? Oh, hi. She goes, yeah, listen, Belinda knows you want to ask her out. Like, oh. I was like, well, it's not going to happen now. Well, I did ask her out later. And I took her to a museum in Manchester. And I actually went to the museum days before and asked the people at the museum, would it be possible to set up a yellow rose like it was on display as one of the displays of art with a little spotlight. They said, well, for insurance purposes, we can't do that, but we could set something up in the gift shop like that with her name on it, right? So I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. So we did, and she loved it. She thought it was great. We went through the whole museum. We went out to the end, and there's this rose with her name on it waiting in the gift shop. So that was cool. But I ended up not getting together with her. It turned out I think she was sort of like semi-dating somebody else. So what can you do? But it is interesting because, I have not asked out anybody for quite a while because I've been ill. And, these stories pop up and they make for all sorts of interesting little tales and stuff like that. And, you always love to hear about how people met and stuff. And, sometimes these circumstances can be just a ton of fun. So I'd love to get some stories from y'all sometime. Maybe we'll do that. I mentioned last night I'm going to open it up to doing, showing and doing little videos about history and historical places and stuff like that. Then I thought also maybe some little short videos about different types of animals. It would be also a ton of fun. Historical things, geographical places, natural wonders, architecture. And also maybe get some stories from you, and you can change the names if you want. We'll keep the names separate if you want to, but it might be kind of fun, some crazy experience where, you met your spouse or, however it happened, would be kind of fun, or how your parents met, or, uncle and aunt or grandparents or whatever, those are kind of nice things. Those are pretty cool. So I'm going to check out comments over here. Let's see. Now Sir John says, I drove all the way from Philadelphia to Ocean City, New Jersey to get rejected. Let me see. Taylor says, I think about the moment and where that person is today. Oh, I'm going to go up a little bit, Taylor. Taylor says, yes, I have had those moments when I missed the chance of reaching out. I still think in the moment and where that person is today. Yeah, it's weird. And, God is involved with everything, but perhaps those learning moments are something you should keep in mind too, or one is supposed to keep in mind. It's tough to figure it all out. But I hope that story was good. And I'll read to you some more from the new short story that I'm writing called Transmitter, coming up very soon. I've got that one all laid out in my head. Everything's all set. It's looking good. So I'll work on that a little bit more tomorrow. And thank you for hanging out, everybody. I hope you like that by Jack Finney. And I hope you look for his novels time and again. And check out Fantastic Fiction, even though those weird pop-ups will pop up once in a while. It's definitely worth it. It's a great website, and I'm sure they'll have it cleaned up very soon. Somebody's just messing with them, or maybe messing with Edge on my browser, but I don't think so. So I'll be hitting the road, and I will say good night. Thank you for hanging out. I would read some more of Transmitter, but I'm going to just wait a little while, and then we're going to rock it as I get most of it written. Maybe 3/4 of the way, and then we'll get to the ending. And it's going to be really good. I will say good night, everyone. Have an awesome night. Thank you for watching David Knight's show. Don't forget Knights of the Storm are coming on at 2 o'clock tomorrow on Rumble. You can follow them at Knights OTS on X. And at noontime, it's America Unplugged on Rumble and the Tony Arterburn channel on YouTube. I will leave you with just the outro for The Outer Limits. It's a short one. And I will release over the weekend the Theology Thursday piece about Dostoevsky. And I will release this reading maybe Sunday or Monday next week. The Russians and I will work on it. Thanks again. And if you want to support what we're doing, feel free to become one of our regular paid subscribers at my Substack. You'll get the news notes every Monday through Friday, and you can contribute at Rumble by becoming a paid regular subscriber over there as well. And you get the audio podcasts at my Substack. Everybody gets that free. And when that post goes out, you can see the PayPal link is in there if you want to, throw a couple bucks out. All right. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to the outer limits.